My name is Alyssa Warren, and I realized that all this time I had been living with a monster. I didn't understand it then. I didn't have the words for the knot in my stomach, or the way the air around my husband seemed to thicken whenever he entered a room. Back then, I thought fear always had to look like bruises or screaming, but fear can whisper. It can hide. It can look like silence. The day everything began unraveling started with something embarrassingly mundane. I had bought a new camera. Not for work, not for a hobby, just because the old one had finally died, and I wanted to start capturing pieces of my life again. Little things. My morning walks. The stray cat that visited our porch. The empty sunsets over our street. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember because Thursdays used to be my favourite light work days. Early dinners, quiet evenings. I had driven to pick up Mark, my husband, from his office. His car was in the shop for routine maintenance, and I was being a good wife, as he liked to phrase it. I parked across the street from his building and pulled out the new camera, testing its autofocus on the blurred silhouettes of people walking by. I wasn't filming anything in particular, just moving the lens back and forth, learning the settings, adjusting the shutter speed. At some point, I zoomed in on the entrance of Mark's office out of pure boredom. And there he was. But he wasn't alone. Mark stepped outside with a young woman I didn't recognize, blonde hair tied in a loose braid, pale skin, oversized sweatshirt. She looked anxious, almost shaky. And then, right there on the footage I didn't even mean to take, he reached for her. Not in a friendly way, not in a professional way, but in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. His hand slid around her waist. She flinched. He pulled her closer. She tried to step back, but he held her firmly like he was making sure she didn't run. I froze, staring through the camera's screen, hardly believing what I was capturing. At first, the only word that flashed through my mind was a fair, stupid, predictable, painful. But the longer I watched, the more wrong everything looked. This girl didn't look like a lover. She looked like someone cornered. Mark leaned in and whispered something into her ear. Her shoulders trembled, and she shook her head in a tiny, helpless motion. He tightened his grip. Then, just for a second, she looked straight across the street, straight at me. I don't know if she saw me behind the windshield, holding the camera, or if she just sensed she was being watched. But her eyes widened with some mix of fear and plea, the kind you give a stranger when you're hoping they'll notice you're in trouble. Mark released her abruptly, said something sharp, his jaw clenched, his expression the cold one he reserved for private moments, and she stepped back, wiping her face quickly, like she didn't want people to see she'd been crying. I sat there, breathing too fast, camera still recording against my chest. For a moment, I considered opening the door and calling out to her, asking if she was okay, asking who she was, asking why my husband looked like a man threatening someone half his size. But I didn't move. Mark adjusted his tie as if he hadn't just grabbed a terrified girl outside his workplace and walked toward my car with a forced smile. The same smile he wore when he wanted something from me. I hurriedly turned the camera off. "Hey, Liz," he said as he climbed inside, leaning to kiss me on the cheek. His lips were cold. "Traffic bad?" His voice was steady, pleasant, practiced. I stared at him, at the man I'd shared a home and a life with for 8 years, and, for the first time, the thought crossed my mind. I don't know who you are. And worse, I'm not sure I ever did. That evening, the house felt colder than usual. Not physically. Our thermostat was set to the same comfortable 72 degrees, but the air had weight to it. A heaviness that clung to my skin, the way humidity clings to windows. Mark always insisted we eat dinner together. "Families who eat together stay together," he liked to say. He never said couples, always families, even though it had been 3 painful years since the last failed attempt to have a child. I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables, but my mind was replaying the footage over and over, the girl's trembling shoulders, the way she tried to pull away, the panic in her eyes. She wasn't a mistress. I was sure of it. Whatever bound her to Mark wasn't romance. It was fear. Mark walked in just as I dropped a knife on the cutting board, the clang sharp enough to make me jump. "You okay?" he asked, in that honeyed voice he used when he wanted to sound concerned. But concern wasn't his strength. Control was. "I'm fine," I said, staring at the knife a second longer before picking it up again. He stepped behind me, too close, his hand brushing my waist, casually, but I felt the possessive pressure behind it. His touch didn't comfort me. Did it ever? But tonight it made my stomach twist. "Rough day," he murmured, "I guess." "You seem tense." I almost laughed. Tense? After watching him intimidate a terrified young woman outside his office. Instead, I forced a smile. "Just tired." He accepted the lie too easily. During dinner, he talked about mundane things. The report he had to finish, the co-worker he disliked, the strange coffee machine someone had broken in the office kitchen. His stories blurred together like background noise. Meanwhile, I kept studying him the way someone studies a venomous snake, hoping to catch the shift before it strikes. He didn't mention the girl. Not a single word. Almost as if she didn't exist. "Liz," he said after a while, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth, "you're quiet. I'm listening." "No," he said, tilting his head. "You're somewhere else." He always did that, acted like he could read my mind, like he had the right to interrogate my thoughts. "Just tired," I repeated. He smiled. A tight smile. A calculating smile. "You know," he said, cutting into his steak with slow precision, "I've always hated when you keep things from me." My heart skipped. Did he know? Did the girl call him? Did he see me filming? I swallowed. "I'm not keeping anything." "Good," he said softly. "Secrets can be dangerous." The way he said it made my skin prickle. It wasn't a comment. It was a warning. After dinner, he went upstairs to shower. The moment the water turned on, I hurried to my purse and pulled out the camera, flipping through the footage with trembling hands. The clip was still there, intact. But there was something I hadn't noticed before. When I zoomed in, just before Mark grabbed the girl, she was already crying. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Her hands clutched something in her pocket tightly, like a lifeline. I paused the video on Mark's face as he leaned toward her. His expression wasn't soft or guilty or conflicted. It was cold, deliberate, threatening. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't cheating. It wasn't a marital problem. It wasn't a moment of weakness. This was something darker, something criminal. I shut the camera off just as Mark came back downstairs, his hair damp, a towel thrown over his shoulder. He glanced at me, then at the camera resting on the sofa. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Deleting old pictures," I lied quickly. He walked over, lifted the camera and inspected it, turning it in his hands the way a cop would inspect contraband. "New model?" "Yeah." "You didn't tell me you bought it." I didn't think it mattered. His eyes flickered annoyance, brief and sharp, before he smiled again. "Well," he said, placing the camera back down a little too gently, "just be careful with it. You wouldn't want to record something you shouldn't." That sentence hit me like ice water down my spine. He walked away, humming to himself, and in that moment, staring at the camera sitting inches from me, I realized something chilling. He wasn't worried about me catching him cheating. He was worried about me finding the truth about him, about the girl, about what he had really done. And for the first time in 8 years of marriage, I felt genuinely unsafe in my own home. I barely slept that night. Every sound, the settling walls, the humming refrigerator, a distant car door outside felt like a threat. Mark's steady breathing beside me, usually comforting in its familiarity, now sounded rehearsed. Too calm for a man who had nearly assaulted a crying girl behind his office. My name is Alyssa Bennett, and as I lay there in the dark, I understood something horrifying. I had been living beside a monster long before I realized one was in the room. At around 3 a.m., Mark finally rolled onto his stomach and went still. I waited 10 more minutes, counting his breaths until they deepened into a heavy, dreamless rhythm. Only then did I carefully slip out of bed, keeping my weight on my toes to avoid the floorboards that creaked. His phone rested on the nightstand, black, sleek, always locked, always face down. He once told me it was habit, but lies look different when you replay them with new eyes. My hands were trembling as I reached for it. I knew his password, of course I did. He'd told me years ago, back when he still pretended I was part of his world instead of someone orbiting outside it. The code had always been the same, his mother's birthday. But when I entered it, the screen blinked red. Incorrect code. My heart dropped. I tried again. Wrong. He had changed it. He had changed it and hadn't told me. Something cold and electric ran through me, not just fear, but the final shattering of a fragile illusion. Mark wasn't careless. He never forgot small things. If he changed the password, it meant he had something to hide. Something recent. I placed the phone back exactly where it was, screen down, angle untouched. Then I slipped out of the bedroom and into the hallway, gripping the banister as if the house itself might throw me off. In the kitchen, I opened my laptop and logged into our shared phone plan. Mark never cared about the account ironically trusting me to handle the boring stuff. But the records didn't lie. At first, the message logs looked normal, nothing suspicious. But then I noticed a string of deleted conversations. Entire threads marked only with a number no name attached. All wiped within the last 48 hours. One number repeated again and again. I copied it, feeling my pulse spike with dread, and searched it through a People Finder site. A name appeared. Sierra Lang. Age 19. Address: 3 blocks from Mark's office. My stomach twisted. 19. The girl in the video couldn't have been much older. I typed her name into social media search bars. A private Instagram. A Facebook page untouched for months. A TikTok with 4 videos, all older, all innocent. She looked young, nervous. The kind of girl who apologized when other people bumped into her. What did Mark want from her? Or worse, what had he already taken? My hand shook as I clicked through more records. Mark had called her 23 times in the last month. She hadn't answered most of them. But the last call 2 days ago lasted 54 seconds. The timestamp matched the approximate time of my recording. He called her after intimidating her behind the building. I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Why was he contacting a 19-year-old outside his office, and why was she crying? That's when I noticed another pattern, one that made my heart go cold. Every time he called or messaged Sierra, he also transferred money. Small amounts. $200, $300. Once, $500. Sent through an app I rarely used, but one he insisted we keep for emergencies. Why would Mark pay her? Was it extortion? Blackmail? Was she threatening him? No. The video made that impossible. She looked terrified of him, never the other way around. So what was he paying for? I closed the laptop as a floorboard creaked upstairs. My breath caught in my throat. I listened, silent, rigid for a long minute. Nothing followed. Still, I hid the laptop behind a stack of cookbooks before going back upstairs. The bedroom felt colder than before, as though Mark's presence lowered the temperature around him. I slipped into bed and lay stiffly on my side. He shifted, half asleep, draping an arm over my waist. But now the weight of his arm felt like a chain, something that bound me, something that warned me not to move, not to breathe, not to think. And as I stared into the darkness, I realized the truth with nauseating clarity. Sierra wasn't the first girl, and she wouldn't be the last, because monsters don't stop until someone stops them. And I was beginning to understand that if I didn't uncover the full truth soon, I might be his next secret. By the next morning, I'd accepted something I never thought I'd have to face. My husband was hiding a crime, and the only person who could tell me the truth was the terrified girl he tried to silence. I didn't go to work. I couldn't sit behind a desk pretending everything was normal while a 19-year-old girl might be in danger, danger tied to the man I shared a home, a bed, and a life with. Mark left early, claiming he had an important meeting. His tone was sharp, clipped, colder than usual, as if he sensed something was different about me. His eyes hovered on my face a little too long, like he was scanning me for clues. But I forced a smile. I lied. I kissed him on the cheek. If he suspected I knew anything, my life could shift into the same category as Sierra's. Disposable. The moment his car pulled away, I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the camera, the same one that accidentally captured his aggression, and drove toward the address tied to Sierra's number. It was a rundown apartment complex near the edge of the city, a place where corners stayed dark even in daylight, and the paint peeled like something sick shedding its skin. The building smelled like bleach and mildew. A man smoking on the front steps watched me climb the stairs with a look that lingered too long. I knocked on her door. Once, twice. No answer. I stepped back, considering leaving when a voice whispered from behind the thin wood. "Who is it?" It was shaky, small, already afraid. "My name is Alyssa," I said, keeping my voice soft. I think you know my husband, Mark Bennett." Silence. Then the chain slid back, and the door cracked open no more than an inch. A single frightened eye appeared between the gap. She was even younger up close, barely an adult. Pale, exhausted, hollow in a way people only become when they're running from something that keeps catching up. "Please don't tell him I talked to you," she whispered. "Please." My heart twisted. What did he do to you? She blinked hard and her eye went watery. "He'll hurt me. He said he will." I swallowed, forcing my own fear down. "I'm not here to expose you. I'm here because I think he's hurting more people than just you. And because I think he could hurt me too." The door opened another inch. Enough for me to see the bruise on her jaw, faint, fading, but unmistakable. A handprint-shaped echo of Mark's violence. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't my imagination. Something terrible had already happened. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "He finds out everything." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Please. I just need to understand what he's done. I need to know what you're afraid of." She hesitated. Her gaze flicked down the hallway, as if expecting Mark to materialize there with that cold smile he wore when he lied. Then she pushed the door fully open. Her apartment was nearly empty, a mattress on the floor, a pile of clothes, a cracked mirror, a single chair. As if she'd moved in overnight or was ready to run again. "Sit," she said softly. I did. She sat across from me, picking at her sleeves. Her hands shook constantly. "How do you know my husband?" I asked. Her shoulders curled inward. "He told me he could help me. With money. With school. With rent." I thought he was being kind. My throat tightened. Mark was never kind, not without a reason. But then, she continued, voice wavering, he started showing up everywhere. Outside my work, outside this building. He said I owed him. And when I tried to tell him no, she lifted her shirt sleeve just slightly. A bruise circled her upper arm like a dark band. Exactly where Mark had gripped her in the recording. I felt dizzy. "He paid you," I whispered. "I saw the transfers, but they weren't gifts, were they?" "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "Every time he gave me money, he made me do something in return, and if I tried to refuse, he'd threaten me." "Threaten you with what?" She looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not what, who. A chill spread from my spine to my fingertips. "What do you mean?" Sierra swallowed, her voice barely audible. "He said he'd hurt someone close to me, someone I love. He said he'd make it look like an accident because he'd done it before." My breath stopped. Before. "He said other girls tried to expose him," she whispered. "He laughed when he told me what happened to them, that nobody ever found proof." It felt like the floor tilted under my feet. "Do you know their names?" I asked. She nodded slowly. I know one of them. My pulse hammered in my ears. Who? Sierra leaned forward, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Her name was Madison Hale. She disappeared last year. And he told me it was because she wouldn't behave. My vision blurred. Mark hadn't just hurt women. He hadn't just manipulated them. He hadn't just threatened them. He had killed one. And he wasn't done. Sierra grabbed my hand suddenly, her grip desperate. You need to leave him, she whispered, before he decides you're a problem too. And as her fingers trembled against mine, one horrifying truth settled deep in my chest. I wasn't uncovering my husband's secrets. I was digging up his victims. After seeing Sierra's bruises, after hearing her whisper the name Madison Hale, I understood. I was no longer safe. Not just from Mark, but from the world I thought I knew, the home I thought I trusted. I drove back in silence, my hands gripping the wheel as if it could shield me from what waited at home. Every turn, every red light felt like a countdown. Every stranger's glance made my heart leap. I kept thinking about Sierra's words. Before he decides you're a problem too. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. Too quiet. Mark's car was gone. Of course it was. He never stayed when someone was asking questions he didn't like. My stomach twisted. My phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. I know what you did. I froze. My hands shook. I wanted to throw the phone, smash it into pieces, but instead I held it tight, staring at the message as if it had physically burned me. I wasn't sure if it was Mark or someone else, someone connected to him. The house smelled normal, coffee brewing, a faint note of lemon cleaner. But it was wrong. It didn't belong here anymore. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to breathe, tried to plan. I had to think rationally. I needed evidence. I needed proof of what Mark had done, because if I went to the police without it, I would become another ghost like Madison. I remembered the security camera in our bedroom. The one I had installed months ago after Mark's temper had escalated. The one I had never dared to check. I grabbed my laptop, swiped it across the table and pulled up the feed. And then I saw him. Mark, at the edge of our driveway, watching, waiting, smiling at the camera. That smile, the one I had once thought charming, loving, was a predator's grin. It made the hair on my arms rise. I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt trapped in a nightmare that was real, that was happening right now. Then the memory hit me. Sierra had said he showed up everywhere. Everywhere. Even at her apartment. He must have known I was talking to her. I needed a plan. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not without proof. Not without someone to help me. I thought about Sierra. If I could protect her, maybe I could protect myself. She had already survived him once. She knew things I didn't. Names, patterns, weaknesses. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. The line clicked. A quiet, trembling voice answered. Hello? Sierra, I whispered. It's me, Alyssa. I'm back home. I think he knows I talked to you. A sob on the other end. I knew he was following you. I tried to warn you. We need to meet. Now, I said. I can't do this alone. She hesitated, then whispered. Okay, but you need to be careful. He'll be watching. I ended the call and sat frozen at the table, staring at the laptop. The feed still showed Mark lingering in the driveway, his hands in his pockets, his head tilting slightly as if listening to the walls. I realized something horrifying. He didn't just watch for danger, he watched for betrayal, for secrets, and now I was one of them. I had no weapons, no backup, no escape plan, but I had determination. And now I had Sierra's knowledge, and that was enough. Maybe. I knew what I had to do next. I had to dig into his past, dig into the girls he had hurt, dig into Madison Hale's disappearance, and I had to survive long enough to expose him. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't just lose my marriage. I would lose my life. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floor, every wind-blown shadow, every distant siren was Mark. Or worse, a warning that he was already inside my mind, inside my home. inside my life. I realized as dawn approached that I had begun a dangerous game, and in Mark Bennett's world, only one rule mattered. The hunter always wins. The morning after Mark watched me from the driveway like a predator studying its prey, I understood that every second counted. If I didn't uncover his secrets fast enough, I would become one of them. The sun wasn't even fully up when I left the house. I didn't bother with makeup or breakfast or pretending to be a wife anymore. I grabbed my laptop, the camera, and a jacket and slipped out before Mark returned from wherever he had been lurking. My hands shook the entire drive to the library. Not from fear, though fear lived in me like a second heartbeat, but because of something worse. Determination. I knew that if I didn't find something today, Sierra and I might not get another chance. The library was empty, still smelling faintly of dust and warm paper. I tucked myself into a corner cubicle, opened my laptop, and began searching the name Sierra whispered like a curse. Madison Hale. Missing for 14 months. Age 20. Last seen leaving her night shift at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Mark's former office. Police had ruled it a runaway case. No evidence of foul play. But I saw her photo, smiling, bright-eyed, someone who looked like she believed in the future. She didn't look like anyone who planned to disappear. I scrolled farther. Then my breath caught, a comment under an old news article. She told me her boss made her uncomfortable before she vanished. Her boss. Mark had worked at that office back then. He had even mentioned firing a young barista who kept messing up orders. I remembered it as a passing joke. But now it felt like a threat hidden in plain sight. I kept digging. I searched for every girl who had gone missing within a 2-mile radius of Mark's workplaces over the last 7 years. 3 names surfaced. 3 girls, 3 vanished lives. Madison Hale, 20. Sarah Delmont, 18. Kaylee Turner, 21. All young, all vulnerable, all last seen near places where Mark spent time. My chest tightened. The similarities were too precise to be coincidence. I clicked through each case, piecing together a pattern I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Then I found something that made my stomach lurch. A police sketch in Kaylee Turner's file. A man seen arguing with her 2 days before she disappeared. Jawline sharp, eyes cold, hair neatly combed. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was Mark, even if no one else had realized it. I stared at the sketch until my eyes burned. Someone cleared their throat behind me. I jumped so hard the chair slammed into the desk. It wasn't Mark, just an older librarian pushing a cart of books. But it didn't matter. My nerves were shot. Every silhouette looked like his. Every whisper felt like danger. I packed my things in a frenzy and hurried outside, where the cold air slapped my face awake. I needed to warn Sierra. I needed to show her what I'd found. Maybe between us we could figure out what to do next. But before I drove away, I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number, 1 voicemail. My heart dropped. I put the phone to my ear. There was no voice, no words, just breathing. Slow, heavy, focused, and then a faint chilling whisper. Going somewhere, Alyssa. I nearly dropped the phone. It was him. He knew where I was. He knew I was digging, and he wanted me to know he was watching. I forced myself back into the car, locked the doors twice, and sped toward the only person who could help me survive this. Sierra's apartment. But when I pulled up and ran up the stairs 2 at a time, something felt wrong. The hallway was silent in a way that wasn't normal, thick, heavy. I knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, harder, still nothing. My breath stuttered. My pulse thrashed. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. I reached instinctively for the door handle. It turned. The door creaked open into darkness. "Sierra?" I whispered. "It's me. Alyssa?" No voice responded, but I felt something in that room. Not a presence, but an absence. A wrongness that made my skin crawl. And then I saw it. On the floor near the overturned chair lay Sierra's phone, cracked, abandoned, and on the wall, smeared in something dark dirt, maybe dust, I told myself was a handprint, too large to be hers. My knees weakened. Mark had been here, and Sierra was gone. The sight of Sierra's abandoned apartment felt like a punch straight to the chest. I had known Mark was dangerous, but this was a new level of horror. He didn't just watch. He didn't just scare. He took. He erased. I sank to the floor, staring at the cracked phone, trying to piece together what had happened. My hands trembled uncontrollably, but my mind was racing. I had to follow the pattern. I had no choice. Madison Hale, Sarah Delmont, Kaylee Turner, Sierra, 4 girls, 4 disappearances, 1 man. The connection was undeniable, and the thought of it sent ice through my veins. Mark wasn't just a husband with a temper. He was a predator hiding behind the mask of a normal life, and he had been doing this for years. I grabbed Sierra's phone. There was nothing on it except a few text messages to friends and 1 recent message from me. Be careful. We need to talk. That had been enough. That had been the trigger. I opened my laptop and began tracking Mark's movements like a detective possessed. I searched social media, his old phone numbers, old addresses, even obscure forums. Every detail he had left online became a breadcrumb. Every breadcrumb pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Mark had been grooming, selecting, and taking girls methodically. And he had left a trail. The more I dug, the more details emerged. Locations, old rental properties, abandoned warehouses. Places where he could have hidden someone without anyone knowing. I felt like I was walking on the edge of a knife. One wrong step, and I would be next. And then I found it. A photo, hidden in a private folder on a defunct website. A photo of Kaylee Turner. She was tied to a chair in a dimly lit room. Her eyes were wide, terrified, pleading. And in the corner of the frame, a figure stood. Tall, shadowed, but unmistakable. Mark. My stomach churned. This wasn't a pattern from the past. This was happening now. And Sierra was in danger. I realized with horror that he had probably taken her to one of his safe places, places no one knew about. He had hidden her away, watched her, controlled her. And just like before, the authorities wouldn't have any clue. No evidence, no witnesses. I had to act fast. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. Panic wouldn't save Sierra. Logic would. I started compiling a map of all the locations I could find linked to Mark's history, all the places he had lived or worked in the last decade. I cross-referenced them with the missing girls' last known locations. One building stood out, a warehouse on the outskirts of town, abandoned for years, overlooked by everyone. Every sign pointed there. But I couldn't go alone. Not yet. I needed help, someone I could trust. And even then, I knew I was walking straight into a trap. Mark was clever, he was patient, and he loved control. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. "Detective Harris," I said when he answered. My voice was shaky but determined. "I think I know where your missing girls are. And I think my friend Sierra is next." The silence on the other end was long. Then he spoke, low and serious. "Stay where you are. Don't do anything rash. I'll be there. And Alyssa. Be careful. This man isn't just dangerous. He's a monster." I hung up and leaned against the wall, my heart racing. The pieces were falling into place, but the image that haunted me the most wasn't the past. It was Sierra. I could see her in my mind, trapped, frightened, her eyes searching for me. I had to save her, no matter what. Even if it meant confronting the man I had once called my husband, even if it meant putting myself directly in his path. Because now I knew the truth. I had lived with a monster, and the monster was still out there waiting. My name is Alyssa Bennett, and tonight I realized that fear can sharpen your senses or dull them completely. My heart thumped like a drum in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I couldn't. Not this time. Not Sierra. Not the others. Detective Harris arrived just as the sun dipped behind the buildings, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. He was tall, imposing, with the kind of calm that made me feel simultaneously safe and tense. We didn't waste words. He spread out a map on the hood of his car, tracing a finger over the location I had found. "This is it," I whispered. "The warehouse. Every detail points here." He nodded, studying the building like a predator assessing its prey. "It's old, abandoned, reinforced. If Mark's holding someone inside, he's prepared for a siege. We need a plan." A chill ran down my spine. "We can't wait. He could hurt her or worse." Harris's eyes softened for a moment. "I know. That's why I'm bringing backup. But we can't rush blindly." We drove in silence toward the outskirts of town. The streets grew emptier, darker, the city fading behind us. The warehouse loomed like a shadow on the horizon, its rusted metal walls reflecting the dying light. I could almost feel Mark's presence, the way he always seemed to know where I was, watching from somewhere just beyond the veil of perception. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. "He knows I'm coming," I admitted. "He always knows." Harris didn't answer. He just parked, signaling for me to stay low. We crept along the perimeter, scanning for signs of life: broken windows, the remnants of old crates, graffiti that had faded over time, but no obvious entrances. Then I saw it. A side door, partially hidden behind a stack of rusted barrels. "That's probably it," I whispered. Harris nodded. "I'll check for alarms. Stay behind me." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to run straight into the building, to save Sierra immediately, but I forced myself to wait. Patience could mean survival. Minutes dragged on like hours. Harris returned, his expression grim. "It's clear for now, but we don't know what's inside. Mark could be armed and he's cunning. We move carefully, or we don't move at all." I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline surge. "Let's do this. We have to save her." We entered the warehouse silently, the floor creaking under our weight. Shadows stretched along the walls like long fingers, and the stale air smelled of rust and decay. Every corner seemed to whisper secrets, every doorway a trap. Then we heard it. A faint, muffled sound, a cry almost imperceptible. My stomach twisted. Sierra. She was here. I ran toward the sound, Harris at my side. The cry grew louder, more desperate, until I could make out words through the muffled sobs. "Please, help me. Alyssa." My heart nearly stopped. I pushed forward, adrenaline blinding me to caution, and then I saw him. Mark. He was standing near a metal cage in the center of the room, his back to me, unaware of our arrival. Sierra was inside, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. The sight of her made something inside me snap. Rage, fear, love, all merged into a singular, unstoppable force. I stepped forward. "Mark!" He turned slowly, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "Ah, Alyssa. I wondered when you'd arrive." Time slowed. Every sound amplified the creak of the cage, the whimpering of Sierra, the distant hum of the warehouse lights. He held a knife loosely in one hand, but it wasn't the weapon that frightened me. It was the cold, calculating look in his eyes. The certainty that he could destroy us both without hesitation. Harris whispered, "Don't make a move until I say." I nodded, though my hands shook uncontrollably. I had lived in terror for years, and yet I felt an unfamiliar clarity. Mark had controlled me for too long. Tonight it ends. "Let her go," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "It's over, Mark. No one will let you hurt her or anyone else ever again." He laughed, low and menacing. "Over? You think you can stop me? I've always been one step ahead. You can't even begin to understand." But as he spoke, I noticed something, a misstep, a hesitation, the tiniest crack in his armor. And in that moment, I realized monsters aren't invincible. They just think they are. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Raw, burning courage. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, sharpening my focus. Mark had underestimated me. That was his fatal mistake. Harris signaled with his hand, slow, deliberate, a warning to stay calm. I tightened my grip on the crowbar I had snatched from a nearby crate. My knuckles turned white, but I didn't care. Tonight, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Sierra, for every secret he had buried, for the years of lies, the bruises, the fear that had stalked me like a shadow. Mark raised the knife, his movements slow, almost theatrical, as if he was performing for an audience only he could see. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a sinister whisper. "I've been waiting. And now you'll finally understand what happens when you cross me." Sierra whimpered from inside the cage. I froze for a split second, seeing the fear in her eyes, the helplessness, and it fueled me. I couldn't wait for permission anymore. I had to act. "Move," I shouted at Mark, and hurled the crowbar with all my strength. It clanged off the metal beam behind him, missing, but the distraction was enough. Harris lunged from the side, tackling Mark to the ground. The knife clattered across the floor. Chaos erupted. I could hear shouting, the thud of bodies, the metallic ring of steel. I ran to Sierra, heart pounding in my ears. The cage door was old, rusted, and though it resisted at first, I wrenched it open. Sierra collapsed into my arms, trembling, sobbing. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe now. I've got you." She clung to me like a lifeline. I could feel her fear, her pain, and I made a silent vow. No one would ever hurt her again. But Mark wasn't done. Even pinned beneath Harris, he struggled with a feral strength, snarling like a cornered animal. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You'll regret this. You have no idea who I am." I stared down at him, my own fear mingling with anger. "I do know who you are," I said, voice steady. "A coward hiding behind a mask of control, and tonight, your mask is coming off." Harris finally restrained him, cuffing his hands behind his back. Mark screamed, a wild, animalistic sound, thrashing against the metal floor. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had seen him for what he truly was, a monster, yes, but a mortal one, a man whose power depended entirely on terror. And terror, I realized, could be broken. Sierra leaned against me, her tears soaking my coat. I thought he would never stop," she whispered. "He will," I said softly, brushing the hair from her face. "He won't ever hurt anyone else. Not us. Not anyone." The warehouse was silent now, except for the distant wail of sirens approaching. I looked down at Mark, his face twisted in rage and disbelief, and a cold clarity washed over me. He had believed he could destroy me, manipulate me, break me, but I had survived. And not just survived. I had won. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. I looked around at the ruined warehouse, at the shadows that had held so many secrets, and I felt a strange sense of closure. This place, once a symbol of fear, was now evidence of triumph. But even as relief washed over me, a shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't the end. It was a turning point, and deep down I knew that the fight for justice, for healing, was only just beginning. Tonight, Mark was defeated, but the scars he left behind would take longer to heal, scars that would stay with me, with Sierra, and with every secret he had buried beneath his cruel smile. And as I held Sierra close, feeling her trembling slowly subside, I realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. Monsters could be caught. But monsters left marks that never truly faded. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the empty streets as the police cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. Their flashing lights painted the night in jagged strokes of red and blue, casting long, sinister shadows across the cracked concrete. For the first time in years, I felt hope. Not the naive, fragile hope I'd carried for so long, but a hard, determined kind, the hope of someone who had fought and survived. Detective Reynolds was the first to enter, his eyes sharp, taking in the scene with a practiced gaze. "Are the girls okay?" he asked immediately, though he already had the answer in the way Sierra clung to me. "They're safe," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He's restrained." The officers moved swiftly, cuffing Mark and leading him away. He screamed and cursed the entire time, spitting words that dripped with venom. But I didn't flinch. I had spent years listening to threats, empty promises, and lies. His words no longer had power over me. Once the immediate chaos settled, I watched as the detectives began examining the warehouse. Boxes were opened, files scattered across the floor. It became clear that Mark hadn't just been hiding Sierra here. He had been keeping records, names, dates, transactions, all meticulously catalogued. Detective Reynolds approached me, a clipboard in hand. "You need to tell us everything," he said. His tone was firm, professional, but there was an undercurrent of compassion. "Every detail, no matter how small." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll tell you," I said. "I'll tell you everything. He's not just dangerous to me. He's done this before." And then it spilled out years of memories I had buried deep to survive. The nights I had cried silently in the dark, the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, the whispers of threats that haunted every corner of our home. I told them about Sierra, the locked room, the hours of watching her suffer while Mark's twisted sense of control consumed him. Every detail was a dagger, every confession a step toward freedom. Detective Reynolds listened, his expression never changing, but when I finished, he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We're going to take it from here," he said. "You did the hardest part. The law will do the rest." But even as the officers catalogued evidence, collected files, and prepared their statements, I couldn't shake the unease settling in my stomach. This was only the beginning. Mark's network, his past victims, there were layers I couldn't even imagine, and I had just pulled the first thread. Later, when the warehouse was empty except for us, I sat with Sierra on the steps outside. She rested her head on my shoulder, still trembling but quieter now. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked softly. I hugged her tightly, feeling the fragile warmth of her small body against mine. "No," I said, though my voice carried a weight of caution. "He won't. But some wounds, they don't heal overnight. We'll take it one day at a time." And yet, even as I spoke the words, my mind refused to rest. There were faces in those files I had glimpsed, names scrawled hastily on paper, dates and locations that made my stomach churn. Mark hadn't acted alone. He had connections, schemes, perhaps other victims I didn't even know existed. That night, back in my small apartment, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment in the warehouse, every scream, every lie. I thought of Mark in his cuffs, furious and impotent, and a cold determination settled over me. I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to see this through. Every secret he had hidden, every life he had touched with his cruelty, I would uncover. And I would make sure he paid for it, not just behind bars, but in the reckoning of every truth he had buried. Because I had learned something vital in the years of fear and manipulation. Monsters may hide, they may deceive, they may strike in shadows, but shadows can't withstand light forever. And I was ready to be that light. The worst part about escaping a monster is realizing how many others he devoured before you ever knew he had teeth. 2 days had passed since the warehouse. 2 days of interviews, paperwork, questions, flashing cameras outside the station, everyone hungry for a piece of the story. But the news didn't know the truth. They didn't know the depth of what Mark had done, how many lives he had scarred long before he married me. Only I knew, and now the detectives knew. And soon, the world would too. Detective Reynolds arranged for me to review some of the files found in the warehouse. He said it wasn't required, that I'd been through enough. But I insisted. I needed to see. I needed to understand exactly who I had been sleeping beside for years. The files were spread out across a long metal table in an evidence room, dozens of folders, photos, handwritten notes in Mark's slanted, aggressive handwriting. The first photo I picked up nearly made me drop it. It was a picture of a girl, maybe 18, maybe younger, her eyes swollen, face bruised, lips cracked from dehydration. The timestamp was 8 years ago. "How far does this go?" I whispered. Reynolds exhaled slowly. "Farther than we thought. He's connected to disappearances from 4 different states, and we found financial transfers, cash payments. Someone was helping him. Maybe several someones." My blood ran cold. Mark hadn't just been acting alone. He had support, people who enabled him, protected him, maybe even participated. I forced myself to look at another file, and another, and another. I felt sick, dizzy, like the room was tilting. Each face blurred into the next girl's with hollow eyes, terrified expressions, bruises, restraints. Some were listed as missing, some were presumed dead, some had no names at all. And every time, in every file, I saw Mark's signature cruelty. The need to own, to control, to break. When I reached Sierra's folder, my hands started trembling. Her name, her address, the date he first noticed her. A chilling checklist of everything he had, observed her routines, her habits, vulnerabilities. And at the bottom of the page, one sentence stood out. "Target ready. Wife is becoming suspicious." Wife. Me. He had been documenting me too. My stomach twisted violently. How long had I been on his list? Had I ever mattered to him at all? Or was I just another pawn in his collection, another file waiting to be completed? Reynolds watched me carefully. We're still trying to determine how many victims there were. But Alyssa, we believe he was preparing to escalate. If you hadn't come forward and if Sierra hadn't survived, this could have continued for years. I swallowed hard. A part of me wanted to collapse right there on the cold floor. Another part wanted to scream. Another wanted to torch the entire room and erase every memory of these horrors. But above all, one emotion rose above the chaos, sharp, fierce, almost primal. Justice. Real justice. And not the kind that came from courtrooms and lawyers. Something deeper. Something personal. "Where is he now?" I asked quietly. "County detention. Maximum security." Reynolds hesitated. "He's requested to speak with you." My heart lurched. "Absolutely not. We're not allowing it. But Alyssa," he paused. "He keeps repeating one thing, over and over." I clenched my jaw. "What?" "That this isn't finished. That someone else will take his place." A chill ran down my spine so violently I had to steady myself against the table. Someone else. Someone like him. Someone on the outside. "He wasn't working alone," I whispered. "There's more. There has to be more." Reynolds nodded grimly. "We think so too." Suddenly I felt eyes on me. Imagined or real, I didn't know. The world outside the evidence room felt darker, less safe. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Stopping Mark was only the beginning. A piece of a much larger nightmare. I closed Sierra's file gently, like handling something fragile, and straightened my shoulders. "I'm not running anymore," I said. "Whatever this is, whoever helped him, I'll help you take them down." Reynolds studied me, searching for hesitation. But there was none. "All right," he said finally. "Then we're in this together." I nodded, even as dread curled low in my stomach. Because deep down, I knew the truth. If Mark had allies, they knew who I was. They knew what I'd done, and they wouldn't stay silent for long. And somewhere, maybe watching, maybe waiting, another monster was already stepping into the light. My name is Alyssa Bennett, and every time I thought I understood the scope of Mark's madness, I realized I had only seen the surface. The day after reviewing the files, Detective Reynolds arranged a secure room for me to meet with the FBI liaison. He said the evidence suggested that Mark's network was not just local but regional, possibly national. People had helped him, covered for him, and some might still be active. I sat at the small, sterile table, papers and photos strewn before me. I tried to steady my hands, but my pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. Every photo, every note, every scribbled observation Mark had kept made my stomach twist. These weren't just files. They were his blueprints. Blueprints for control. Blueprints for cruelty. "We have reason to believe he's been grooming victims for years," Agent Whitman said gravely. "We think he's been testing his control, manipulating people in ways that make them complicit or afraid to speak." I clenched my fists under the table. "You mean he didn't just do this alone?" Whitman shook his head. "No, he had accomplices, or at least people who looked the other way, and now, with his arrest, someone might be stepping into his role." I could barely breathe. The thought of Mark's shadow stretching beyond the prison walls was suffocating. He had been everywhere, and now I understood the danger was not over. That night I returned to my apartment, but sleep didn't come. Every noise outside the window sounded like footsteps. Every shadow in the hallway seemed alive, watching. I felt hunted, exposed, as if Mark's influence lingered in the air. I kept thinking of the files, the girls, the names, the dates. The realization struck me with cold clarity. He had been meticulous, patient, and completely untraceable until now. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You can't stop what's already moving." My heart pounded. I dropped the phone and dialed Reynolds immediately. "They have someone following me," I said, voice trembling. "Someone's threatening me." He paused, then said, "Alyssa will put surveillance on you, but be careful. If Mark has associates, they're calculating. They know exactly what you mean to the investigation." I hung up, trying to steady my shaking hands. Fear mingled with rage. Rage that Mark had destroyed lives, that he had nearly destroyed mine, and now, even behind bars, his reach felt limitless. Days passed. Agents monitored every movement I made, but the paranoia never left. Each shadow seemed deeper, every passerby's glance suspicious. I started sleeping with the lights on, double-checking locks, running through scenarios in my mind. And then, a break came. Whitman called. "We've identified a suspect who might have been helping Mark financially. It's a man in Detroit, a seemingly normal businessman, but he has ties to multiple disappearances. We believe he's been funding Mark's operations and may have recruited others." A sickening thought hit me. Mark had planned this network like a web, and I had just stepped into its center. "I'll help you catch him," I said, voice firm despite my fear. "I'll do whatever it takes." Whitman hesitated. "Alyssa, this is dangerous. We'll need you to cooperate, but don't go alone. If he suspects you're digging, he won't hesitate." I felt a cold determination settle over me. I wasn't going to let Mark or his network manipulate me any longer. I had survived his hands, survived his control, but if there were others out there, I would face them, and I would make them pay, legally or otherwise. That night, as I sat staring at the ceiling, I realized something. Fear was no longer my master, it was my weapon, and I would wield it to expose every corner of Mark's monstrous world. Because in the darkness he had built, I would be the light. But deep down, I knew the truth. Monsters like Mark don't vanish quietly. They leave footprints, and their shadows always find a way to stretch back into the lives they once haunted. And I was ready to step into the shadows. I had finally understood the cruel truth. Monsters don't always wait behind bars. Some of them plan, they manipulate, they strike through others. And now, I was staring directly into the abyss Mark had left behind. The FBI had arranged a safe house for me outside the city. It was a small, nondescript apartment, the kind you could pass by without thinking twice. The walls were bare, the windows had blinds I could close, and a phone on the counter had no outgoing numbers, just a direct line to Whitman. It was secure. It was cold. It was mine. I spent hours poring over the files I'd been given, the financial trails, communications, and meeting notes of Mark's associates. One name kept appearing: Victor Lang, a man in his 40s, a businessman with a spotless public record. But the files hinted at something far darker. His hands were in the disappearances, in the grooming, in the cover-ups. Whitman finally called. "We need you to act as bait. Victor is scheduled to meet an associate tomorrow night. He doesn't know the FBI is watching. You'll go as yourself, but under surveillance. We need to see who he reports to, who he contacts, and if there's anyone else in the network." Fear coiled in my stomach like a live thing. I nodded, even though I was trembling. "I'll do it," I whispered. "Just tell me exactly what to do." They gave me instructions, precise and cold. I was to meet Victor at a public cafe, look casual, keep my phone close, and never, under any circumstances, leave the camera's view. The next evening, I left the safe house dressed plainly: jeans, a hoodie, no makeup. My reflection in the darkened window of the subway station startled me. This wasn't Alyssa Bennett anymore. This was a shielded version of myself. A weapon. A woman who had to survive the monsters that hunted in plain sight. At the cafe, Victor arrived, a man of impeccable posture, tailored suit, calm, almost too calm. His eyes swept the room like a hawk, scanning, calculating. I felt a chill as he smiled at the barista, and then, seemingly by accident, glanced directly at me. "Whitman," I murmured into the hidden mic. "He sees me." "Stay calm," came the reply. "He's not aware you're the focus yet." Victor approached my table with a polite nod. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, voice smooth like silk over steel. "Not at all," I said, trying to sound casual, my hands folded over the table. He studied me for a long moment, his gaze unnervingly sharp. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" I forced a laugh. "I don't think so. I get that a lot, though." He smiled too easily. "I'm Victor. I run some investments in the city. Nothing too exciting." As he talked, I noticed the subtle ways he tested me, questions with hidden meanings, remarks that could indicate prior knowledge. My stomach clenched. He was smart, dangerous. Everything about him screamed that he was not just an accomplice, he was a predator in his own right. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Whitman's voice whispered urgently, "Alyssa, he's moving. He's signaling someone. Get ready for us to intervene. Don't react." Victor leaned closer, his eyes locking on mine. "You seem cautious, careful. I like that. Most people are too easy to read." I swallowed hard, forcing my face into a neutral mask. "I've just been around the block, I guess." He chuckled softly, but there was a darkness behind it, that subtle undercurrent that made my skin crawl. For a split second, I imagined Mark's face, that cold, familiar smirk. And in that instant, I realized that Victor was following Mark's design, learning from him, maybe even improving on his cruelty. Whitman's voice was back in my ear, tense. "Alyssa, he's leaving. Follow his movements, but do not engage. Cameras are live. FBI is on standby." I nodded silently, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. Victor left the cafe with deliberate steps, his phone pressed to his ear, his back straight, a predator moving among prey. And as I watched him disappear down the street, I knew one thing. This was just the beginning. The monster I thought was behind bars had left fragments of himself everywhere. And now I was chasing his shadow. I also understood something else. Mark had been grooming more than just victims. He had groomed successors, and I was about to face the first. That night, as I stepped out of the cafe into the cool, restless air, I finally understood. Danger didn't come with warning bells. It came quietly, patiently, like a shadow learning your steps before you ever sensed its presence. Victor disappeared around the corner, blending into the flow of evening traffic. I followed from a distance, hands stuffed in my pockets, pretending to scroll on my phone while Whitman and his team guided me through the hidden mic. "Maintain distance," Whitman murmured. "We're tracking him from 3 angles. If he veers off toward you, we'll intervene." But despite his calm tone, I could hear the tension beneath it. Victor walked with purpose, checking his watch, pausing at crosswalks just long enough to observe who stood behind him. He wasn't nervous. He was calculating, the kind of man who could trace a tail without looking over his shoulder. "He knows he's being watched," I whispered. "No," Whitman said. "He suspects everyone. That's different." But it didn't feel different. It felt like he sensed me. He turned onto a quieter street, heading toward a dim parking lot behind a row of closed shops. The lights flickered, several bulbs dead, the rest buzzing faintly. My instincts screamed for me to stop, to turn around, to get out of there. "Whitman, this is a dead zone. Cameras will be sparse. Keep moving. Team B is 30 seconds out." I swallowed the knot forming in my throat and kept going. Victor reached a grey sedan parked near the back corner, its windows tinted too dark to be legal. He paused with his hand on the door handle, glancing around one last time. That was when I saw it. A small, deliberate smile tugging at his lips. Not the smile he had used in the cafe. Not polite, not friendly. Something cold, knowing, predatory. "He's smiling," I said, barely breathing. "Whitman, he knows something." "Stay where you are," Whitman ordered. "We're almost—" The sedan's engine roared to life, the headlights flashed on, and then the car lurched forward, straight toward me. "Alyssa, move!" Whitman shouted. I sprinted toward the nearest alley as the sedan accelerated, tires screeching, the metal grille grazing my hip as I dove out of the way. I hit the pavement hard, skin scraping, breath knocked out of me. The car swerved, skidding sideways. For a fraction of a second, the tinted window aligned with me, and I saw a face staring out. Not Victor, someone else, someone older, hardened. A face I didn't recognize, but that chilled me to my bones. "Whitman!" I gasped. "There's a second man, he's not alone." "We see him. Stay down. Officers inbound." The sedan spun sharply, reversing fast before tearing out of the parking lot. Victor didn't chase it. Instead, he stepped calmly toward the mouth of the alley where I was crouched. His posture relaxed, hands in his pockets, like he was out for an evening stroll. He knew exactly where the cameras were, and where they weren't. "Team A, move in, now!" Whitman barked. Victor stopped just a few feet away from me. Streetlight shadows cut across his face, leaving his eyes in darkness. "You shouldn't involve yourself in things you don't understand," he said softly. "Mark was only one piece. There are others who don't appreciate interference." My pulse hammered so loudly I barely heard myself whisper, "Who are you working with?" Victor tilted his head. "Wrong question." He took a single step forward. "The real question is, why did Mark choose you?" My breath froze. Before I could speak, sirens pierced the night, drawing closer. Victor smiled, that same unsettling quiet smile, and stepped back. "That's enough for tonight," he said. "But we'll speak again, Alyssa." He vanished into the darkness between 2 buildings just seconds before FBI agents stormed the alley. I was pulled to my feet, voices shouting, lights flashing, hands guiding me away. But all I could hear was Victor's calm, haunting question echoing in my mind. Why did Mark choose you? For the first time since this nightmare began, a single terrifying possibility formed in my thoughts. Maybe I wasn't just another random target. Maybe Mark hadn't married me for love or control alone. Maybe I had been chosen, and I wasn't ready for the reason why. I realized that all this time I had been living with a monster. The realization hit me like a cold wave, leaving me trembling in the shadows of the life I thought I knew. I had always believed in the man I married, in the warmth of his smile and the promises he whispered under the dim glow of our bedroom light. But now every word, every touch, every carefully crafted gesture seemed like a calculated move in a game I never agreed to play. Last night, I had found something I couldn't unsee, a hidden drawer in his study which I had never dared to open before. I told myself it was curiosity, just idle curiosity. But the moment I slid it open, the evidence of his true nature sprawled before me like a nightmare made tangible. Documents, photos and files that spoke of lies, manipulation, and a secret life I could never have imagined. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my eyes burned with the truth. The files were detailed, organized meticulously as if he knew one day I might stumble upon them. Names, dates, incidents. A chilling trail that painted him not as the man I loved, but as someone who thrived on control, on instilling fear, and on erasing the boundaries of my life. The worst part was that some of it involved me directly. Moments I thought were private, safe, intimate had been noted, logged, and used as tools in his game. I sat on the cold floor, clutching a photo of us on our wedding day. His hand was in mine, smiling at the camera, and I remember thinking how perfect it was. But now, staring at the same image, I felt bile rise in my throat. That smile was not love. It was a mask. And I had worn blinders for years, never seeing the predator in front of me. Fear gripped me, but alongside it a spark of something new, anger, clarity, a hunger for justice. I could no longer be the victim waiting for disaster to strike. I had to act, to find a way to survive and expose him before he could cause more harm. Every step I took after that night was careful, measured. I began documenting everything he did, every lie, every act of manipulation. I took photos of hidden spaces, kept copies of his files, and watched him closely, learning his routines, anticipating his moves. I realized that living with a monster meant more than enduring physical threats. It meant living in constant psychological tension, wondering if today would be the day he would finally break me completely. But it also meant that I could study him, understand him, and prepare to strike back. The night deepened, and while he slept unaware, I planned. I had to create a path that led to safety, to justice, and eventually to revealing the man behind the mask. He was dangerous, yes, but for the first time in years, I felt the sharp edge of control returning to my own hands. This was only the beginning. The days after I discovered his hidden life were like walking through a fogged mirror. Everything familiar seemed distorted, every sound suspicious. I tried to act normal around him to maintain the illusion of the obedient wife, while inside, a storm of fear and fury raged. I learned quickly how dangerous it was to let him suspect that I had uncovered anything. One wrong glance, one slip of emotion, and years of planning could crumble in an instant. He went about his daily life, unsuspecting, charming the neighbors, smiling at me with that same deceptive warmth. But I saw through it now. Every gesture was rehearsed, every word calculated. And I kept asking myself, how could someone so seemingly ordinary harbor such darkness? The contradiction haunted me. I started keeping a small journal hidden beneath the floorboard under my bed, chronicling his behavior, his manipulations, and my observations. Every lie he told, every secretive call, every suspicious disappearance, I wrote it all down. I had to keep proof, concrete evidence, because instinct told me he wouldn't stop. He thrived on control, and if I didn't act, he would continue to manipulate, humiliate, and perhaps worse. One evening, while he was at the office, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at the wardrobe where he kept his suits and coats. I had begun to notice details that once escaped me. The smell of cologne he never wore in front of me, the hidden pockets in his jackets, the receipts for places I had never visited. He had two lives, and both existed right here, under the same roof. I needed help, but I had to be careful. There was no one I could fully trust. Friends often sided with him because of his charm, his social presence, his ability to convince anyone that he was the victim or the hero in any story. Even family members had been subtly manipulated. I realized that if I wanted justice, I had to rely on my own wits, my own courage. Late at night, I began constructing a plan. It had to be meticulous. First, I would gather undeniable evidence, recordings, photographs, documents. Then I would create a timeline of his actions, connecting the dots of deception, control, and criminal activity. If I presented it carefully, law enforcement could not ignore it. But more than that, I wanted him to face the consequences in a way that stripped away the mask he wore for so long. The thought of confrontation terrified me, but there was no turning back. He had shown me his true face, and now for the first time I felt the power shift. I was no longer entirely the victim. I was becoming a strategist, a survivor, someone who could manipulate the hunter without him even realizing it. And yet, every night, as I lay in bed, I heard his breathing in the dark room and felt the weight of the danger. One careless move, and everything could fall apart. I had to be precise, patient, and invisible, the perfect predator studying another predator. The line between fear and determination blurred, but one truth became clear. If I didn't act soon, he would eventually destroy everything I loved, and I couldn't let that happen. The first step in my plan was observation. Every movement he made had to be documented. I became a shadow in my own home, pretending to watch television or read, while my ears and eyes were attuned to every whisper, every subtle shift in his behavior. I learned the patterns of his life, when he left for work, who he called, what routes he took, the slight twitch in his jaw when he lied. One afternoon I followed him to a part of town I didn't know well. He parked his car in front of an unassuming building, a place that seemed abandoned from the outside. I hid behind a dumpster, heart racing, as I watched him enter through the back door. Inside, I could see shadows moving, the faint glow of lights behind boarded-up windows. My stomach twisted. What was he doing here? Who else was involved? I took out my phone, pretending to scroll through messages while secretly recording. The risk was immense. If he saw me, he could turn violent in an instant. Yet, the knowledge that I was finally seeing his world beyond our home gave me a strange sense of empowerment. The monster I had been married to was not invincible, and for the first time I had proof. Over the next few days, I pieced together the pattern. This place I discovered was where he conducted his most clandestine activities. Financial manipulation, intimidation, and something darker that I was only beginning to understand. Receipts and bills that didn't match his explanations, cryptic notes in a ledger hidden in his office, strange packages sent to P.O. boxes in his name. Everything pointed to a life built on secrets and crime. At home, he remained the same charming, unassuming husband, but the illusion was cracking. The way he smiled at me now felt like a dare, as if he knew I was starting to see. I couldn't be sure, but I felt the tension in his gaze, the slight hesitation in his words. I had to stay careful. One mistake, and he would know I had infiltrated his secret life. Late one night, I sat at the kitchen table with all my evidence laid out. Photographs, recordings, financial statements, copies of messages. Each piece was a puzzle, and slowly, the picture became horrifyingly clear. I realized he was capable of far more than manipulation and emotional abuse. His hands were stained with crimes that could ruin lives, maybe even end them. I thought about confrontation, but I knew I had to be strategic. Law enforcement alone might not act unless presented with undeniable proof. And more than that, I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. To realize that every lie, every act of cruelty, would have consequences he could not escape. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floor, every knock on the door sent me into a panic. Yet, with fear came focus. I drafted a plan, one meticulous, careful, undeniable presentation of evidence that would leave him exposed, trapped by the very web he had spun. And then, one evening, as I reviewed my recordings for the third time, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A figure in one of the shadows, not him, but someone else watching him. The implications were terrifying. My plan was no longer just about exposing my husband. It was about surviving whatever larger network of deceit he had drawn me into. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't the same frightened girl anymore. I had seen the monster, and now I would find a way to stop him. I didn't sleep the night before. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through our curtains, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. It was strange how peaceful he looked when he slept. Almost gentle, almost human. But I knew better now. The calm surface was only a disguise, a thin mask stretched over something violent and unpredictable. By morning my nerves were raw. My hands shook as I prepared breakfast, and I forced myself to move with the same habitual rhythm I'd rehearsed for years. He sat at the table reading the news, completely unaware that my phone, hidden under a stack of napkins, was recording every word he said. He looked up at me once, eyes lingering a little too long. "You're quiet today, Em," he said lightly, folding the newspaper. "Something wrong?" My heart seized. For a split second, I felt exposed, transparent, but I smiled, pushing hair behind my ear like I always did when I lied. "Just tired," I said. "Didn't sleep well." He studied my face, and I felt the weight of his attention like a blade pressing against my skin. Then he nodded and returned to his coffee. I exhaled silently. I had to move quickly. I had enough evidence to make him look suspicious, but not enough to destroy the facade he'd built. If I went to the police now, he'd talk his way out of it. He'd turn the story on me, twist my fear into instability, paint me as the paranoid wife. And worse, he would know I'd betrayed him. I needed something irrefutable, something explosive. And I thought I found it. That afternoon when he left for his late client meeting, I drove straight to the abandoned building he frequented. My pulse thundered as I walked toward the back entrance. My phone was in my pocket, recording. I told myself that if I just caught him doing something, anything, it would be enough. Inside, the smell of damp concrete and old machinery filled my lungs. Shadows clung to the corners, thick and oppressive. I moved deeper, my steps soft, controlled. Then I heard voices. I pressed my back to the wall and listened. "She doesn't know anything. I've made sure of that," Eric said, his tone calm. Too calm. Another voice, unfamiliar, gravelly, replied, "I don't like loose ends, Eric. If she finds out—" "She won't," Eric cut in sharply. "I'll handle her." My blood iced. They were talking about me. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. My breath felt trapped in my throat. I edged forward, peering through a narrow gap in the doorway. Eric stood facing a man I'd never seen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden in the shadow. Between them lay a metal table with documents, maps, and what looked like— my stomach dropped. A gun. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from gasping. "Just remember," the stranger said, leaning in, "if she causes trouble, it's on you." "She won't," Eric repeated. "She's clueless." A twisted smile flickered on his lips. That was my moment. Proof. Undeniable, horrifying proof. I raised my phone and zoomed in slightly. My hands trembled, but the image was clear enough. I had it. I stepped back, slowly turning toward the exit, and the heel of my shoe snapped against a loose piece of concrete. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Silence. Then, "Who's there?" Eric's voice sliced through the air. Panic exploded in my chest. I ran. I didn't think, my body simply moved, sprinting out of the building and into the open air. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands shook violently as I fumbled the keys. The engine roared to life. And that's when I saw him. Eric burst out of the building, eyes blazing with fury, scanning the parking lot like a predator. When he saw my car speeding away, his expression shifted from confusion to pure, chilling understanding. He knew. He knew it was me. He knew I had seen. He knew I knew. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. A text from him lit up the screen. Come home. Now. I felt nauseous. He wasn't asking. He was hunting. And now he knew exactly who the prey was. The car's engine roared, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion. Every red light, every turn, every passing stranger seemed like a countdown to the inevitable. My hands were numb on the wheel, yet I couldn't stop. I knew that if I slowed, even for a second, Eric would catch me. And if he did, I didn't even want to imagine it. I tried calling the police, but my hands trembled so badly I couldn't dial. Finally, I managed to tap in the number and a voice answered. My words spilled out, frantic and broken. He knows. He knows I've seen him. He's dangerous. Please, hurry. I hung up before I could sob too loudly. The operator would send help, I hoped. They had to arrive before he did. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text from Eric. Stop running. It's useless. You've been hiding from me your whole life, Emily. Now, face the truth. I swallowed hard. My stomach churned. He knew my full name. He knew everything. Every move I'd made in the last 48 hours, every whisper of suspicion, every step I'd taken to gather evidence he knew. And now it was too late to hide. I turned into a side street, hoping to lose him. My mind raced. There had to be a plan. I couldn't let him corner me, but as I rounded the bend, a sleek black SUV blocked the road. My heart slammed against my ribs. Eric stepped out. The streetlights caught his face, cold and calculating. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. I slammed the car into reverse and backed up, tires squealing. But the SUV mirrored me, cutting off my escape. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. This was it. The monster and the prey, and I was trapped. He smiled then. Not the charming, everyday smile I'd known. Not the one that had fooled me for years. This was pure malice, unfiltered. Emily, he said softly, almost tenderly, it's over. You've played your games long enough. Let's end this. I realized in that instant there was no reasoning with him, no bargaining, no pleading, no tears that would reach him. He was a predator, and I was his last target. But I had one move left. I grabbed my phone and hit send to the police, activating the live location. My hands were shaking violently, but I forced my legs to move. I gunned the car forward just as he lunged at the door. The impact jarred me. The SUV scraped against mine, and I felt the metal buckle. My vision blurred. Then, in the chaos, I remembered the knife I had hidden in my purse, the last resort. I thrust it through the small opening in the passenger window toward him. He stumbled back, surprised, and I didn't stop. I floored the accelerator and crashed the car into the streetlight post, metal screaming, glass shattering. Pain shot through my leg, but I didn't care. I ran, dragging myself out of the wreckage, my phone still clutched in my hand, recording, broadcasting proof. Sirens wailed in the distance. He froze, realizing the law was finally on its way. His eyes, wide and frantic, met mine for the last time, and then he vanished into the shadows of the alley, leaving me broken, bleeding, but alive. The police arrived minutes later. They found me huddled beside the wreck, crying, trembling, and clutching my phone. When they reviewed the footage, the truth became undeniable. Every threat, every crime, every shadow of fear I'd felt, all captured, all exposed. Eric was arrested that night. I never saw his face in freedom again. But the victory felt hollow. Years of terror, manipulation, and fear couldn't be undone with one arrest. The scars would remain, etched deep into my mind. I had survived. I had won. But I had paid the ultimate price. And as I sat in the sterile light of the police station, waiting to give my statement, I whispered to myself, voice trembling, I lived with a monster. And now, he's gone. But so much of me will never be the same. Weeks passed, but the nights felt endless. I moved into a small apartment downtown, far from the neighborhood that held too many memories. too many walls that had witnessed his cruelty. The city buzzed around me, indifferent to the trauma I carried like a stone in my chest. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow on the walls, every knock at the door sent my heart racing. Even the sunlight that streamed through my window felt intrusive, harsh, as if it reminded me that life was still moving forward while I remained trapped in the past. Therapy sessions helped, in fragments. I learned to name the fear, to track the panic attacks, to call for help when the memories became too loud. But some nights, I would wake drenched in sweat, haunted by the face of the man I had once loved, or thought I had loved, the man who had tried to destroy me. The police files called it domestic abuse and attempted murder, but those words were hollow. They could not capture the years of manipulation, the suffocating terror, the nights I spent pretending to smile while planning my escape in secret. They could not capture the constant, gnawing realization that the person you trust most can be the one who turns your life into a nightmare. I kept the recordings, the evidence that had saved me. Sometimes I would play them back, just to remind myself that I had survived, that I had fought, that I had outsmarted the monster. But even victories carry weight. Even freedom has its chains. Some people asked me if I would ever love again. I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't. Trust had been fractured in ways too deep to repair. Every kind word, every gentle smile now carried a shadow of suspicion. I was free from him, yes, but I was never free from the memory of him. And yet, life persisted. I learned small things again, to cook a meal without fear, to walk outside at night without flinching, to laugh quietly at a joke without looking over my shoulder. I discovered resilience I didn't know I had, a courage forged in the fire of horror. I am Emily, survivor. I lived with a monster, and I escaped. But the world had changed me. Forever. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I whisper to the darkness, a warning to anyone who might ever think to harm another. You can try to break someone, but some of us, we survive. And when we do, we never forget. The shadows may linger, but I remain.